Rally Day. You excited to be here? The Delaware Convention of States team is thrilled and thankful for each of you that has taken the time out of your day to join us at the state capitol this morning. We appreciate you taking this important stand against government overreach and for self-governance. Thank you for participating in the political process, for exercising your God-given right and privilege that was so eloquently expressed in our country's founding documents and was understood by our founders to be essential to our representative form of government. When you engage in a public rally such as this, and when you visit privately with your elected officials inside of Legislative Hall in an hour or so, you are exemplifying the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And in taking part in this event today, you are helping Convention of States fulfill our ultimate mission of building an engaged army of self-governing grassroots activists. I'd like to introduce Reverend John Campbell, who will give the invocation. Where's John?
Good morning. Let us pray for our nation. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, who has given us this good land for our heritage, we humbly beseech thee that we may always prove ourselves a people mindful of thy favor and glad to do thy will. Bless our land with honorable industry, sound learning, and pure manners. Save us from violence, discord, and confusion, from pride and arrogancy, and from every evil way. Defend our liberties and fashion into one united people the multitudes brought hither out of many kindreds and tongues. Endue with the spirit of wisdom those to whom in thy name we entrust the authority of government, that there may be justice and peace at home, and that through obedience to thy law we may show forth thy praise among the nations of the earth. In the time of prosperity, fill our hearts with thankfulness, and in the day of trouble, suffer not our trust in thee to fail. All which we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, their bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Well, I think we should have had the flag up here for that. Now I'd like to invite some members of Troop 239 and Pack 239 of the Boy Scouts of America to perform their flag ceremony.
Stand to the side, buddy. Stand here, buddy. I'll look this way up the flag.
Color guard, attention.
Audience, please rise. Scout salute. Those not in uniform, please place your right hand over your heart. Color guard, present the colors. Color guard, halt. Color guard, cross the colors. Please recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 2. Will all Scouts, past and present, join us in saying the Scout Oath and Law? On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and to obey the Scout Law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. 2. Color guard, post the colors. Color guard dismissed.
I'd like to take a moment to thank our military veterans for their service to our country. I know we have quite a few here today. These heroes don't look for any recognition, but we wanted to recognize them by placing a gold star on their name badges. If you see someone with a gold star, please take a moment and thank them for their sacrifice to our nation. We'd also like to recognize and thank any legislators who showed up here at the rally. Is there anyone that could raise their hand and tell us who they are? I don't see anyone. Okay. How about any candidates who are running for political office? We'd like you to introduce yourself, your name, and what you're running for, please. Thank you so much. My name is Ginny Watkins, and it's my honor to serve as the State Director for the Delaware Convention of States team. We have an amazing, energetic, positive, and committed team that is working to inform the citizens and elected officials of Delaware about our Article 5 project and to pass the Convention of States resolution through our state legislature. The folks who are wearing the Delaware blue t-shirts like I'm wearing are on the team and can answer any questions that you may have about Convention of States in general or about what's happening here today in particular. I also want to acknowledge and thank our regional director who drove from Ohio to be with us for this special event, Monica Sellers. Raise your hand, Monica. Monica is our resource and our liaison to the national team and has become a personal friend of mine. Her expertise in all things COS, as well as her integrity, kindness, and servant's heart, greatly bless our team in general and me in particular. Thank you, Monica, for all that you do for us. Now just a word about what to expect for the rest of the morning. In a few moments, you'll be hearing from several members of the Delaware team. Our goal is to inform you of our Article 5 process, our national and state progress in terms of grassroots activism and legislative strategy. But we also want to inspire you, to give you hope in these dark days, and to empower you that no matter what your situation, there is something you can do to help save our republic. In fact, there is something that you must do, because as Thomas Jefferson noted, all tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent. After my teammates share their stories, we will be treated to our keynote speaker. I guarantee you will leave this rally enlightened and energized. At the conclusion of the rally, each of you that is able to stay is encouraged to walk around to the opposite side of the building and enter Legislative Hall through the west doors. After you pass through security, there will be a number of Convention of States team members with the Delaware blue shirts who will help guide you to the offices of your representative and senator. You can ask if they are available to see you, or you can leave a note and the packet of information encouraging them to support the Convention of States movement. These personal contacts are a powerful way for you to influence your elected officials. The Convention of States organization got its start in 2013 after a successful grassroots effort by the Tea Party movement to get the largest class of conservative candidates elected to Congress in decades. And then it became painfully clear that they were failing to enact legislation reflecting conservative ideals. As Convention of States co-founder Michael Farris explains, change in personnel will not restore liberty, but state legislators can institute change to our governing structure through an Article 5 Convention of States. Each of the 27 amendments currently in our U.S. Constitution got there through a process whereby Congress proposed and voted on the amendment and then sent it out to the states to be ratified by 34 of them. Our founding fathers understood, though, based on their great knowledge of history and human nature, that any government, no matter how carefully formed, has the potential to become tyrannical, especially when the people become uninvolved in civic affairs. So they provided a method for the citizens, through their state legislators, to call for a convention or meeting of the states to propose amendments that will rein in the federal government. This method is found in Article 5 of the Constitution, and it forms the basis of our Convention of States effort. Since it's such a short article, I'm going to take a moment and read it to you. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or, on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of this Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states, or by conventions in 3/4 thereof, as the one or other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress. Once 2/3 or 34 states have passed a resolution through their state legislature, the convention of delegates from each state will meet to debate, discuss, and vote on amendments, potential amendments to the Constitution. These amendments, according to our resolution, are limited to 3 specific topic areas: those that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit its power and jurisdiction, and impose term limits on its officials and members of Congress. Once proposed amendments have been voted on, just like with the congressional method, they will be sent back to the states to be ratified by 3/4 or 38 states. This high bar means that only amendments that enjoy the approval of the majority of Americans will be added to our Constitution. So where do we stand today, and how do we make Delaware one of those required 34 states? Well, as of today, 19 states have voted to call for the convention. To get Delaware on board, this is the process that we're looking to do. We need to identify one or more of our Delaware legislators who will sponsor our resolution. At that point, it will be assigned to a committee, and there will be committee hearings where COS supporters and opponents will testify. Once the committee votes yes, the resolution goes out to a full floor vote. This process has to happen in both the House and the Senate, with a final yes vote in each. By now, I hope you're asking, what can I do to help make this happen? Well, there are dozens of specific actions you can take, and our team would love to discuss those with you. But the overall strategy is to inform and educate increasing numbers of Delawareans about the COS movement by any and all means possible, to gather growing stacks of petitions, and then to leverage the massive grassroots support to influence our legislators to do the will of their constituents by sponsoring or supporting the COS resolution. As I said earlier, we appreciate you being here and the sacrifice of time and energy it represents. But honestly, our country is in a dire situation, and saving it from those who would destroy it is going to take more than a morning at the state capitol. Drastic times call for drastic measures, which for many of us means an ongoing sacrifice of time, energy, and resources as we race against the clock to save our republic. I had a conversation just a couple days ago with a petition signer. I called to thank him for signing and supporting our cause, and then he spent the next 15 minutes bemoaning the current condition of our country, the mismanagement of our money, the bought-out, power-hungry career politicians who care nothing about his concerns, and the egregious overreach of congressional power into every area of his life. After about 15 minutes, I spoke up. These concerns are many of the very issues the Convention of States seeks to address, I said. We have an amazing team of like-minded citizens who are working hard to spread the COS mission. Would you be willing to consider joining us? Well, he said, if you have another event coming up and I happen to be free, I'm willing to be a warm body and help boost the numbers. But other than that, I really can't commit to anything. Why not? I asked rather boldly. You just told me what a desperate situation our nation is facing. Well, you see, I work this job and I have this family and I have these other interests and this volunteer activity. I'm a busy person. And what I said to the gentleman was, well, if you ever change your mind, you know how to reach me. But what I wanted to say was, do you understand that once we lose our country and our freedoms, all of these other things that seem so important to you right now, they may not matter anymore. In 1 Chronicles 12:32, the Bible describes a segment of the army of David, the men of Issachar. It describes them as men who had understanding of the times to know what the nation ought to do. I believe we need men of Issachar in America today. We need men and women who understand that these are fateful days, who know that what must be done is extraordinary, and who are willing to make the personal sacrifices required at this time. We can't be guaranteed of the outcome, but we can adopt the motto of John Quincy Adams. After his tenure as president, he spent the last 18 years of his life fighting to abolish slavery in the pro-slavery House of Representatives. Adams never saw the results of his efforts, but they were carried on by his protege, Abraham Lincoln. And his motto, duty is ours, results are God's. So thank you for your attention, and now I'd like to invite Michelle Williams. Some of you may recognize her name since she speaks quite often on WGMD. I wanted to give you an opportunity to see her in person and hear her heart.
Thanks, Jenny. I've been told to keep it to 5 minutes. As an Air Force officer and veteran, I've taken an oath dozens of times. Upon my commission, upon each promotion in rank, and a similar version when I re-enlisted those service members. The shortened version goes something like this. I, Michelle Williams, do solemnly affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I take this obligation freely, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office about which I am to enter. So help me God. I got to scratching my head saying, who else takes this oath? Well, in Article 6, Clause 3 of the Constitution, other people that take the oath are senators, representatives, members of certain state legislatures, all executive and judicial officers, and federal officials. On top of that, when the president takes the oath, he, quote, will do the best of his ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. But honestly, when I look over these last 30 years in the military, I am appalled at myself to say that I really had a superficial understanding of those words of that oath. But it wasn't until I retired in 2015 that I heard somebody talking about Article 5 to make amendments to the Constitution that I wanted to learn more. So what did this Constitution really mean? How was it being used? Why was the media reporting on one thing, but I opened my eyes around me and I'm seeing things differently? I had to ask myself, was I living under a rock? Was I just happy in my small little world, denying whatever was in front of me and avoiding my own critical thinking? And I looked around to all my family and friends. I got no answers because they were just like me in my thinking. I could no longer stand for this disregard of the truth that I sought. So as they say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. I went to learn about the grassroots movement of the Convention of States and what all this hubbub was all about. So it began to tug on my heart a little bit. Yes, I signed the petition, and yes, I too went on my merry way. But over the next few months, COS just kept on tugging at my heart. So like you, I'm very busy. Like other military members, when we retire, even though our uniform comes off, our service does not stop. So I continue to volunteer for several local organizations. And I also work a full-time job. So I told myself, just like Ginny said that the gentleman on the phone told him, I certainly can't take on another thing, and certainly not another volunteer activity. But over the months, and I'm feeling sometimes just like you, enough is enough, and it kept building. The mask mandates and restrictions at hospitals that kept me from entering my father's room while he was dying. The vax passport that I don't have kept me from serving on a board for health and housing. And then the spending of money on other countries when we have working people in this country that can't find affordable housing, veterans and others who are homeless, increased drug overdoses because of the openness of our borders bringing in adulterated substances. Aren't you supposed to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on others? So now enough is way too loud. And like the anchorman, Howard Beale in the movie Network, for those of you that are young enough to remember, I'm mad as heck and I'm not gonna take this anymore. So I raised my hand for the Convention of States, and the rest is my history. What I love about the Convention of States and being a volunteer is that I'm surrounded with patriots like you, Americans that care about their present and about their future generations, like the little gentleman is sitting under a tree over there that I can't see. Yes, that's you. So, and the other thing the Convention of States did, I told you I was so wanting to learn about the Constitution. Well, they taught me. And I realized that this little guy here isn't being followed. So the Convention of States movement has the solutions that are bigger than the problem. I am so grateful for seeing all of you out there who are listening and wanting to get your questions answered. I'm very thankful to WGMD 92.7 FM, and I know that there's people out there, and especially my good friend Jake Smith, who always gives me time to talk about what I love, and that's Convention of States. So you're here because you want to learn with your critical skills, with your critical thinking skills, not what somebody's going to tell you or what you heard on the media. And hopefully you will join our grassroots efforts here in Delaware. We have a country to save, and we need your help in our backyard in Delaware. Thank you.
Can everyone hear okay? Okay, great. All right, I'd like to introduce Tanya Hetler, one of our district captains and also a state content writer for our team, to come and share some of her thoughts about her Convention of States experience.
You guys are so far away. Can you come closer? I feel like it's miles away. I'm kind of taller than, there we go. Okay, so yes, I'm Tanya Hetler, and I am so happy that you are all here this morning. Thank you, Right to Life and Right to Work people, for being with us as well. That's awesome. I want to briefly share with you my personal experience as a volunteer with Convention of States. I have been interested in politics for many years and have been a talk radio and TV news junkie since my 20s, but I've never actually gotten involved in politics. To tell you the truth, it seemed sort of scary or wacky. All these people going to rallies and things, you know, sort of like us today. I thought, oh, that's kind of weird, but I decided to sign the COS petition in August of 2020 when I saw things really starting to go awry in the country. I couldn't stand on the sidelines anymore, like others have said, and had to step up. So I became a district captain with Convention of States. The district captain role is the backbone of Convention of States. The district captain, or DC, heads up their own local House of Representatives district. In Delaware, we have 41 House districts and we have 20 district captains. So we're almost to the halfway point. So maybe today, one of you will join us and decide to be a district captain and we'll be past the halfway point. The job of the district captain is to tell people about Convention of States and get more petition signers and more volunteers. So far in Delaware, we have 8,027 petition signers. I think that's pretty amazing for our little state. There are many opportunities to help COS grow, from being a district captain to being a social media warrior, an events coordinator, organizing things like this, a state photographer and videographer, doing block walking, attending events and parades, being a part of the prayer team, or being a state content writer, which is what I do. And these are only a few of the opportunities. If you go to the Convention of States website, you will see plenty more that you can pick from. So no matter what your interests are, and no matter what your skill sets are, and no matter how little or how much time you have to give to us, we can use you, and we'd love to use you. We even provide the training that you need through videos that we call Convention of States University. And these, I can tell you, like Michelle said, I've learned so much. And we also team up with Patriot Academy and learn the Constitution from them. So you will learn so much. You will learn how much you don't know is what you'll find out. So it's great to be able to use our talents to help save our country. But honestly, one of the best parts of volunteering with Convention of States is that you make so many wonderful friends. And all these people in these teal blue shirts are my friends. You guys are awesome. I love working with you guys. And if you join us, you can be part of that team and that part of that friendship. Our Convention of States team has weekly Zoom planning meetings. We have monthly introductory meetings in each of the 3 counties throughout Delaware, telling those who have just recently heard about COS or signed our petition a little bit about what we're all about. And now we've started having monthly volunteer meetings, which we'd love to have some of you guys come to, covering smaller regions, so breaking each county into like 3 sections. And those who want to get more involved can come and learn about the various opportunities at Convention of States. They can see what role they might want to take on, and once again, learn a little bit more about the US Constitution. So we would love it if you would join our COS Delaware team. We have great fun, learn a ton, and most importantly, are working together to save our country by doing our part to help rein in the federal government. Please join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Ben Cassell is our legislative liaison. He's the person on the team that kind of works between, it is what it sounds like. He works with the legislators and with the district captains and kind of helps us all meet in the middle somewhere. So Ben is going to share a little bit about what's happening in Delaware from the perspective of the legislature.
Thank you, Jenny. First of all, I want to recognize that every event I've ever been, people award who traveled the farthest. Well, Mark Meckler wins. He came from Texas. And Monica only came from Ohio. So, but anyway, I want to thank not only Jenny, but to thank all of you for coming out here today. We are very grateful for your patriotism. And the nation is grateful for your patriotism. And we're also grateful for your support. We know that on a June morning and a nice weather, there's always something better to do, but there's nothing better than what you're doing right now. I'd like to give a brief history of the Convention of States legislative activity in Delaware, if I may. In 2015 is when it really got active. And of course, at that time, Ginny, and earlier than that, Ginny was our sole leader and worker. But a bill was introduced, a resolution was introduced, I should say, by Senators Lawson and Benini. But it failed. That was in 2015. Statewide at that time, we had less than 500 petition signers, but we tried. So after that, over the next several years, Ginny pulled up her big girl pants and dug in and recruited lots more leaders, lots more volunteers, and things that we needed. And unfortunately, in 2020, we ran into something called COVID, and the hall behind me closed to the public. So we couldn't go meet with legislators other than through Zoom meetings, and they weren't very effective at all because they controlled the dialogue. We also lost out on a lot of opportunities to exhibit at events and get petitions signed. But what happened in late 2021, last fall or so, things started to loosen up, and we did a lot more events, if you will. Anywhere from the Apple Scrapple Festival to festivals throughout the state, Milford, Harrington, several others. But in 2022, just about 6 or 8 weeks ago, Legislative Hall reopened. And shortly after that, we went in a rally, and small group, we were able to meet with 10 legislators. You heard earlier, there are 62 total. So that's about 12, 13% in one day. It's not easy. We got to learn some things, we got to share some information. But today, when we go in, we're armed with over 8,000 petition signers. That is 16 times what we had in 2015. And we need more. At the start of this session, we assumed that the resolution would be introduced. It wasn't. And can everybody hear me? I'm sorry. We assumed that the resolution would be introduced, but it wasn't. And when we questioned why to their supporters in the legislature, they said we didn't have enough traction and they were afraid it would fail. Well, here we are. We're developing traction. That's what we're doing now. Now what? So what? You're part of that traction. you're just demonstrating our resolve. And by meeting with legislators, we're boosting our communication skills. We need to make friends on both sides of the aisle. We need their support. Delaware is not a state we can depend on one party. We need independence as well. We need everyone to understand. In my meetings and a lot of our district captains' meetings with legislators, what we hear most is, oh, I didn't know that. Or the regular run-of-the-mill objections to a convention of state logic. But most of what we've heard has been untruths, that they were rumors over the years. They've been misinformed. It's our job to inform them. It's our job to remind them of the oath that they took, politely. We can't go in and demand, we need your support, sign here that you're going to support it. It won't work. And it's not going to happen this year. Marketing experts will let you know that someone has to hear a message at least 8 times before it really sinks in. So we've got till the end of this year, beginning of the next session in next January, we've got to let our legislators hear from us. They can do this several ways. You can do letters. Handwritten letters are preferred. They like them better. They give more attention to them. Or even emails. But when you do write them, and I hope you do, let them not just say, we want you to support Convention of States. Give them your reason, whatever that reason may be. It might be over financial issues. It may be over term limits. It may be over overreach. Whatever it is, let them know why. We need to communicate with the media through letters to the editor, polite letters. And we need event coverage. All you district captains and all you volunteers and everyone else, if there's an event in your community, and if we can show up in a parade or put up a table and put out a sign and say, please help us sign petitions, that's what we need, because we need to grow those 8,000 petition signers by the end of the year. My personal goal is to see us somewhere between 10 and 12,000. Because it's interesting, when I have sat down with some legislators where we don't have district captains, because they're the first, district captain's the first line of offense to meet with them. But when I meet with these others, and they'll say, yeah, I've heard of you, I've seen a few petitions, and I look at them and say, Senator, you've had 1,200 petitions. And then they realize it, because they trickle in. They don't realize the cumulative value. So again, it's an educative process. And we need to grow our list of supporters and volunteers. So how do we get this support? You need to reach out. Reach out to your neighbors, reach out to your family, reach out to your friends. Reach out to strangers. I do. You know, it helps, it grows. We'll need more events all over the state, especially in Newcastle County, but we'll take them anywhere we need them. District captains need to motivate their teams and find those events and work those events. And most importantly, we need to develop bipartisan sponsorship in both the House and the Senate. Both House and Senate. And we need to talk with Democratic leaders, we need to talk with Republican leaders. Not every Republican is going to be for us, and not every Democrat is going to be against us. So how do we do it? I know how I plan to do it, because too loud? Oh, sorry. We need to repeat. I like to say what I've used over my life when I want to get something done. I just repeat 10 two-letter words. They're simple, 2-letter words. And I say to myself, if it's to be, it is up to me. And I'd like you to repeat it with me, if you would. If it is to be, it is up to me. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your support. Look forward to the rest of the day.
Thank you, Ben. Well, now the person that we really came to hear. So it's my honor to introduce the co-founder and president of the Convention of States, Mark Meckler. He's the person that has sacrificed, we talked about sacrifice, he's sacrificed greatly to initiate this movement and to lead us forward. He's the one that we look to for inspiration and information, and we're just so honored that he could be with us in Delaware today. Mark, thank you.
We'll talk a little bit about Levi. For those of you who don't know, Levi is my 140-pound Great Dane. And every Sunday night I do what we call the Facebook battle cry, and Levi is the star of the battle cry. So it's not me, it's Levi. You know, I want to thank you guys for having me here. First of all, this is my first time to the Delaware State Capitol, which is pretty cool, right? So I've been all over the country. I've been in the capitals of most of the states. It's really amazing to be here. This place is very unique, right? It's not what you would consider a standard looking state capitol. And I love it because it's obviously much more historic. Delaware is the first state. It's much more colonial in its look and feel, right? And one of the reasons why I love it so much and I love being here, and I haven't even been inside yet, I'm really looking forward to being inside, is because it harkens back to the beginning of the country. Because it takes us back to the original values of America. You can't come here and not think about the men and the women and the families that sacrificed to make this great nation. You look at this building and you understand just the sense of history that is right here. You understand about people who were willing to put their lives on the line for liberty. You heard some of the speakers talk about volunteering. Talk about volunteering. These people picked up muskets and they were willing to go out and they were willing to fight and die. And a lot of them did. And they shed blood on battlefields from here all across the war zone, all across as far away as Pennsylvania. Imagine how that was back then, though. We take it for granted. Last night I flew into Philly and I drove here from Philly, and we take that for granted. It was just over an hour drive. And that seems like nothing to us because we can get in our car, we can turn on the air conditioning, we have our GPS, we get on the highway. I mean, the construction on 95 makes it difficult, but it's not like it was in the old days. And I think we take that for granted of how easy it was to get from one colony to another or one state to another. And I think we take for granted how much the way it was made the country unique from state to state or colony to colony. The cultures were very different. People lived in very different ways than they do today, and then from colony to colony. Each colony was more like where its origin country was from than the other colonies. Most people in a colony didn't travel to another colony. Most people didn't travel to another town during their lifetime. So the culture was very different. And it's important to remember that, because if we remember that, we don't take for granted our system of governance and why it developed the way it did. One of the most fundamental things about our system of governance is the idea of self-governance. You know, most people don't realize this, that the parent organization for Convention of States officially, its filing name, was Citizens for Self-Governance. And I would argue it's a terrible name. And the reason it's a terrible name is because most people in the country, when we started this organization almost 12 years ago, had no idea what self-governance meant. It had largely been forgotten in the American lexicon. And there was a lot of debate, by the way, when we formed this up among our board members, among early supporters. Should we actually call it Citizens for Self-Governance? It's a mouthful, and nobody knows what self-governance means. And we batted around a lot of names, and we did focus groups, and we tried to figure it out. And what we kept coming back to is we had to call it Citizens for Self-Governance. Because without this root concept of self-governance, our country isn't what it's supposed to be. So what does self-governance mean? What does it mean to be a self-governing person? A self-governing person is a person who has free will. And our free will comes from only one place, and that's the Almighty. We were given free will by God. And so when we are self-governing people, when we acknowledge that we live ourselves under God's laws, but we have free will and we're self-governing people, we acknowledge the proper order of things. We have freedom. God gave us liberty, but liberty has to be distinguished from the idea of licentiousness. Liberty means the freedom as a human being to do what is right under God's laws. That's the meaning of liberty. It doesn't mean the ability to do whatever the heck you want to do. That's licentiousness. There's only one path for licentiousness. It leads to ruin of a person, of a city, a county, a state, and a nation. And we're on that path right now. So when we go back to self-governance, the first thing we say is, what do we do if we're self-governing people? We look out for ourselves. We make sure that as Jordan Peterson would say, one of the greatest modern thinkers, that our own house is in order, that our own bed is made, that our own church is looked after, that our own community is looked after, that our own school is looked after. We don't look to the government to do that. We look at ourselves first. And we say, what is my responsibility? What can I do? What's my job? what was my oath. And my son is a Marine. And it was incredible to me to hear Michelle say the oath. The first time I heard the oath was when my son took the oath. You know, I didn't serve in the military, so I went down and sometimes we think it's some big fancy ceremony, man. You got a new kid going in the Marine Corps, there's 2 or 3 of them in a room. An officer walks in, gives them the oath. If you're a parent, it's a very intense moment, right? Because you're watching your kids sign their life away to the military. And I watched him take the oath, and I'd never heard that oath before. And if you had asked me what I thought they took an oath to, I would have told you to the country. I would have told you maybe to the flag, maybe to the branch of the military, maybe to listen to the orders of the president. I was blown away when I heard the words, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I was completely blown away by that. So what does that actually mean? What it actually means, and I want you to understand the seriousness of this. As a parent, this is how I understood it. It means he was willing to die to defend the Constitution. That's a pretty incredible thing that every member of our military does. And having met thousands upon thousands of veterans who are involved in Convention of States all over the country, one phrase I hear over and over again from our veterans is, yeah, I may have retired from the military, but my oath never expires. Right? There's nothing that says that the oath is over, that their oath is done. I think somebody's phone's going off here through this. That's okay. I just thought maybe I'm out of time. Is that it? Am I done? So watching my son do that, I asked myself a question when I stood there. If he was willing to do that, if he was willing to stand in the line of enemy fire, if he was willing to give his life, to bleed and die, to defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, what was I willing to do? His dad that watched him sign there, that watched him sign his life away in defense of the Constitution. And the answer for me was, whatever I can. If he's willing to do that, an 18-year-old kid, and he's willing to put the rest of his life on the line as a grown adult that's raised that young man, what am I willing to do? And my answer was, for me, whatever I can. Anything that I can. You know, people say, and I heard Jenny say this when I walked up, that I've sacrificed so much, and I'm going to push back against that. I'm going to push back against it because it's not sacrifice for me. For what I do, it's not sacrifice, it's privilege. I am so blessed. The hard work of Convention of States is done by people like Michelle and Jenny and Ben and all the other volunteers here that are here day in and day out, that come here to Dover, that go into the legislature, that meet with the legislators who might not even understand what we're doing, who might not even know about what we're doing, who might be opposed to what we're doing, and day in and day out, with a loving heart, with a smile, with kindness, they walk inside that legislature. They call those legislators, they email those legislators, and many of you do all of this stuff. That's the hard work of politics. I show up, I put on the fancy suit once in a while. I tell my wife I go out, my job is to be the dancing chicken. That's my whole job, right? I show up, I don't dance, by the way, so you're not gonna see that. But I show up and I give my speech, and hopefully I provide a little inspiration, a little bit of motivation. But the hard work of politics is done at home, here in the state capitol, in your own community, and fundamentally because you're willing to fight. What does it mean to be willing to fight? To actually, in politics, be willing to fight, or to put it on the line. You know, there's a story from the American Revolution. Some of you have heard me tell this story before. You're going to find out why my dog is named Levi Preston. Because he's actually named after a Revolutionary War hero. And when I say he's a hero, to me, he is the greatest hero of the American Revolution. He's the most important hero of the Revolution to me. And the reason he is to me is because he was a regular person. When we talk about the American Revolution, when we learn about it in school, whether you went to private school or public school or you're homeschooled, the people that we learn about are the heroes, the big heroes with a capital H. We learn about Washington, Adams, and Madison, and Jefferson. The people who wrote the speeches, the people who rode the white horse, the generals, the orators. We learned about Patrick Henry, who said, "Give me liberty or give me death." We all know those people. What we don't know are the stories of the regular people. And by and large, history itself is written by regular people. It's not one man or a small group of men and women. It's not one family. It's the people who are willing to step up, who are willing to sign on the dotted line, who are willing to put it all on the line. Imagine when they signed the Declaration of Independence, they knew they were signing their own death sentences. We know a few of those men, a few of those families, but not most of them well. And we don't know Levi Preston, and we should. And the reason we should is because when the battle at Concord took place, when the call went out, when the Minutemen were called to the field of battle, Levi Preston showed up. He was 23 years old. He was a farmer. He was not a soldier. He picked up his musket like he had trained to do in defense of liberty, and he went to the field of battle, and he went to fight the Redcoats. The Redcoats were the greatest fighting force ever assembled in human history. Literally, the most well-paid, the best trained, the best fed. And they were fighting for empire, the greatest honor, fighting for the greatest empire that had ever existed. Imagine what that must have been like if you were Levi Preston and you got the call. It would be like me riding up to your front door on my horse and telling you the Marines are in town, they brought an entire battalion, go grab your handgun, we're gonna fight them. It's crazy. What they did was crazy. And the only reason that we know Levi Preston's story is because there was a young historian by the name of Mellon Chamberlain. And Mellon was traveling around the country, and this is 1843, long after the American Revolution. And he was looking for the last remaining Minutemen. He knew that if he didn't collect these stories in writing, talk to these people face to face, their stories would be lost. In 1843, the last remaining Minutemen were all in their late 80s or early 90s. Now for us, we all know people that age. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Back then, if you lived to your early 90s, you were like Methuselah. Average age was 54, that was average life expectancy. So to make it into your 80s or 90s, everybody in town would have known you. When Mellon Chamberlain rode into town and said, "Are there any Minutemen?" everybody would have known. And so when he asked in that town in North Carolina where Levi Preston had retired, "Are there anybody?" everybody said, "Captain Preston. You got to talk to Captain Preston." So he went and he interviewed Captain Preston like he had done so many before because he wanted to understand the origins of the American Revolution. Again, being at a building like this, we need to understand this. Why did they fight? And he asked Preston a series of questions. First, he asks him, "When you went out to face those Redcoats that day, what did you mean by it?" Preston says, "What did I mean by it?" And he says, "Yes, sir. Was it the Stamp Act? Were you frustrated by having to buy the stamps and put them on all your documents?" And Preston says, "Stamps? Sure, I never bought one. Governor Bernard locked them all in the armory." So it wasn't the Stamp Act. That's what I learned in public school was the Stamp Act, right? He said, "Was it the tea tax? It must have been the high taxes on British tea." He said, "Tea, I never drank any tea. I was a farmer. We drank coffee. Boys dumped it in the harbor. That was that." So it's not the tea tax. It's not the Stamp Act. So he says, "Well, maybe you were reading the great revolutionaries. You were reading Milton and Burke, Thomas Paine, Montesquieu." And he said, "I've never heard of those men. We read the Bible, Catechism, Psalms. Some of us read the Almanac, but those men you speak of, I've never heard those names." He's flustered, I would imagine, at that point, because he's laid out the grounds for the American Revolution, and Captain Levi Preston, who was on the field of battle that day in Concord, Massachusetts, says, "I didn't fight for any of those things." And so he goes big, and Chamberlain asks him, "Well, maybe it was British tyranny. You were tired of the heavy hand of British tyranny." Captain Preston says, "Tyranny? Never felt a whit of it. No tyranny, no stamps, no tea tax, no great revolutionary writers. He wasn't reading Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Why did he fight? We need to know." And thank God Mellon Chamberlain asked him. "So then why did you go out?" And Preston then speaks what I think are the words that best represent the political philosophy of the American Revolution than anything ever said by any of the great orators, any of the great speechwriters, any of the people that we know as the heroes with a capital H. He said this, "Son, when we went out to face those Redcoats that day, we meant only one thing. We had always governed ourselves, and we always intended to. Them Redcoats, they intended that we shouldn't. That's it. It's simple. And as so many simple things are, it's profound and beautiful. Because what he was saying is that we were a self-governing people. And how do we get there? How do you get to this point where Levi Preston steps onto the field of battle with a musket, with the courage, with the conviction to know we've always been a self-governing people? How does our history take us to the moment of Levi Preston? Because if we don't know where we came from, we can't know how we got lost. If we don't know where we came from, how do we get back there? How do we find our foundational principles? And so after I heard that Preston story, I wanted to know. How does Levi Preston come to be? How do all the men and the women and the families that were willing to sacrifice all, how do they get to that point in our history? And so I wanted to know what happened before the American Revolution. What was Delaware like before the American Revolution? I'm not talking in the weeks and months leading up. I'm talking in the years and the decades and the century before the American Revolution. What was going on that allowed these Americans to become so unique that they would fight the British Empire for the idea of self-governance? And so I started to try and study it. I looked for books about the period. There aren't a lot written. This is incredible. If you go back all the way to Jamestown, go back to the Mayflower Compact, and try to find books written about that period in history. First of all, somebody asked me once, how long is it between the Mayflower Compact and the beginning of the American Revolution? Somebody asked me that at a rally like this, and I looked at them blank. I went to that file cabinet in the back of my head. There was nothing in there but dust and cobwebs. Now I'm 60, so there's a lot of those now, but this was a few years back. And I couldn't answer. I thought, I don't know, 75 years, 90 years, 100? I had no idea. The actual number is 158 years. That's roughly 5 generations. So for 5 generations in the United States of America, people had governed themselves. They had largely been left alone. You've heard of the concept of benign neglect by the crown. I mean, they were thousands of miles away across an ocean. They discovered and developed their own systems of government based on where they had come from, based on their knowledge of history and biblical principles. They learned to govern themselves. I discovered this history by going and trying to find books. You know, I was sitting at Hillsdale College. My daughter is a Hillsdale College graduate. So I was at Hillsdale College, one of the best educational institutions in the country. I happened to have the privilege of being there for homecoming. My daughter was in her first year. I'm sitting in the President's Club box. It's not as fancy as it sounds. And I'm sitting next to Dr. Larry Arnn. You guys know who Larry Arnn is, right? Great American patriot. So I'm sitting next to Larry Arnn, and this is my chance to try to understand this part of history. This guy knows the Constitution, right? So I'm sitting next to him. It's the first quarter. I'm a little bit intimidated. The guy's a genius. He knows more about American history than I could ever possibly know in my whole life. And I lean over and I say, Dr. Arnn, and he looks at me and he goes, yes. And I said, there's this period of American history, and I need to know, are there any books written about this period of American history? And he looks at me, and Larry Arnn has a great sense of humor, and he looks at me just completely deadpan, and he said, I have one answer for you. And I leaned in and said, yes. And he said, please shut up until halftime. Literally. So I was appropriately chastised at halftime. We had a great conversation. He turned me on to a bunch of books about this period. If you're interested in it, Pauline Maier, M-A-I-E-R, writes about this period. Bernard Bailyn, B-A-I-L-Y-N, writes about this period. Great books on early American history. And what I discovered is that for that 158-year period, it was the most important period in American history. It's when we learned to govern ourselves. It's when all these institutions that we know and love developed. And by the time Levi Preston walks onto the battlefield in Concord, he has all this stuff inside of him. It's outrageous to him that somebody would tell he and his family how to live their lives. And now if you jump forward in American history to where we are today, and you look at what's going on in Washington, D.C., not all that far away from here, they are telling you how to live your life. The founders would have been appalled. They're telling you what kind of car you can drive. They're telling you whether you have to wear seatbelts or not. They're telling you what the drinking age is. They're trying to tell you what kind of guns you can own. They tell you how you can use your property. They tell you how we have to deal with the environment or not deal with the environment. If you're a farmer, they tell you how you can grow your crops and how you cannot grow your crops. The federal government is in our business at every level. And you know what the founders would have said? Nope. Nope, we're not going to allow it. The founders fought a war over less egregious invasions than this. There's another important point in American history that you have to understand. Why did we actually fight the war? So the tea tax has been rescinded. It's not the Stamp Act, as Levi Preston said. It's not British tyranny overall, as Levi Preston said. There was a moment when the screw turned and the revolution became inevitable. And that moment is after the tea tax is rescinded, the Parliament and the King passed the Declaratory Acts. And if you haven't read about this period in American history, read about it. The Declaratory Act, so interesting, because when it's passed, it does nothing. It literally does nothing. It's just a proclamation. It's just a declaration. That's why it's called the Declaratory Act. But what it says is fundamental. It says that we, the Parliament and the King of England, can tell you what to do anytime we want, and you can't say anything about it. And the founders understood, and especially Sam Adams understood, that is the dividing line between liberty and tyranny. Because when somebody says to you, I can tell you what to do, I can tell you what to do, and you have no choice, you have no input, you have no vote, that is slavery. They own you. They're in charge of you. They can tell you what to do with your life, your liberty, your property, your freedom. They control you. And Sam Adams said that's a line that cannot be crossed. And out of that comes the American Revolution. And from the American Revolution comes this: freedom, liberty, the beacon of hope in the world. And that freedom and that liberty are now flickering, aren't they? Anybody think we're in trouble? So, look, I acknowledge that we're in trouble. And this is important. We are in trouble. The country is at risk. I think it's as bad as I've seen it in my entire lifetime. My first vote, I'm 60 years old, first vote was for Ronald Reagan. Made it an easy vote, right? But for the rest of my lifetime, I've watched the country ebb and flow and ultimately decline, and I think we are in trouble. Does anybody believe that the country is coming apart? Yes. Country's coming apart. I call it the great decoupling. And the country is indeed coming apart. And we see it on every issue, whether it's abortion or guns or taxes or health care or vaccines or masks or whatever it is, the country is coming apart. And I have a different perspective on the country coming apart. I hear people lament this all the time. I think it's awesome. Yeah, it's a little weird, I know. Here's why I think it's awesome. Because if you look at the history of this country has always been coming apart. In fact, one of the things that makes this country so extraordinary and so good is we built a country based around people who don't get along and who don't like each other. Don't believe me? Look at the period before the American Revolution. People in the colonies didn't like each other. Right? If you were from here, you didn't like people from Pennsylvania. If you were from Pennsylvania, you didn't like people from Rhode Island. Well, to be fair, nobody liked anybody from Rhode Island, so we'll leave them out of it. But the reality is the colonies were very different, and they didn't like each other, and they were harsh on each other, and they almost came to military blows multiple times. And so we had this country that was very diverse, to use a modern term in its real sense. People had different philosophies of government, of personal autonomy, of what the church looked like. It was mostly different sects of Christianity that were fighting. So that's where we come from. That's our heritage. And we joined arms and we fought the American Revolution because there was an existential threat in the form of the King of England and Parliament that were greater than the threat we felt from each other. And we went to battle. And regiments from Delaware fought next to regiments from other states, other colonies, right? And you would think that after fighting like that on the fields of battle, after becoming brothers in arms, that we would go back and be done victorious, and that we would care for each other, and we would trust each other, and we would like each other, and we would realize that we had a common bond with each other. And that's not what happened. What happened instead is we got the Articles of Confederation, and we got those because we didn't like each other and we didn't trust each other. And people from here said to people from Pennsylvania, I don't trust you, I don't like you, I'm not going to give you any power over the people of our new state. And we get the Articles of Confederation. It's a disaster because the federal government has zero power. There's so little trust for each other, zero power, it's non-functional, no power to tax, no power to raise an army, no power to do anything really. And so we come together again in 1787 at the convention, the famous convention in that summer in Philadelphia. We come together and we come to Independence Hall, and you know the stories. It was awesome. It was easy. It took them about 2-3 days to draft the Constitution. Everybody liked each other. No. You guys didn't go to public school, did you? It almost seemed like you bought that story. No, so we come together and we fight. And we don't like each other. And people are accusing each other of parochial interests, big states versus small states, slave states versus free states, individual interests. And Madison himself, ego invested in what was going on. George Mason, an anti-federalist, fighting against everything about a central government. They didn't like each other. And out of that comes the most unique, most amazing, most durable form of constitutional government ever in the history of the world, and that is federalism. So I want you to think about the roots of our system come out of a time in our country when we really didn't like each other, when things were very fractured, when government didn't work. It sounds familiar, right? Those are our roots. That's where we get federalism. And if you go through the course of American history from there, we've never liked each other. This is important. This country was not built for people who were all the same. It was actually built for people who were very different religions, different outlooks on the world, different ideas about the size and scope of government. That's how our country has always been. And there came a point where things started to change, and this is World War II. And coming out of World War II, going in, we unify. More women go to the workforce than ever before in American history. People sacrifice together. People recycle. People buy savings bonds. We all come together as a nation to fight an existential threat. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Like the American Revolution, the threat from out was greater than the threat from in. So we unify. We come out of that period. We are victorious. We come home, we have the most prosperous period in American history, and we build what I call the veneer of unity. Because now it feels like, well, we were all in this thing together. Now we get the American dream. This is the house and the picket fence and the dog in the yard and the 2 kids. And the American dream comes and everybody starts chasing the American dream. And so that's coming out of World War II. In the 1950s, you get franchising begins. You get national television networks. We're all watching the same media now. You get national brands start to develop. People are all smoking Lucky Strike cigarettes and using Borax soap, right? These are national brands for the first time. You get franchising in the 1960s. You can drive from California to New York and you can eat at the same restaurants. You can buy the same gasoline. You can stay in the same hotel chains. We're all exactly the same, is what it seems like. You get Major League Baseball. You get the National Basketball Association. You get NFL football. We're all watching the same sports leagues. We're all the same. It is e pluribus unum, or so it seems. On the surface, we're all unified. But if you travel this country, and a lot of you have done this, and I've done it a lot, people in Mississippi, they're not so much like people in New York City. People in New York City, not so much people like people in Abilene, Texas. People in Abilene, Texas, not so much like people in Los Angeles, California. And if you talk to people in those places, and it's always been this way, if you go into Manhattan and ask them about people in Alabama, they're going to say some pretty terrible things, just generally speaking. Oh yeah, those are the people who marry their cousins. They don't have any front teeth. Those are ill-educated people. They're unsophisticated people. And if you go to Alabama and you ask them the same questions about people in Manhattan, they're going to say, oh, those are those pompous, arrogant jerks who think they know everything, right? And this is how America has always been. I'm not criticizing that. This is the nature of a huge country with a diverse population. And so something is happening in this country. We build this veneer of unity, but underneath the veneer of unity, something else happens. In the 1960s, we get the Vietnam War, and the Vietnam War begins to fracture the fabric of society. Underneath this idea that we're all the same, that big government can rule over us all, we start to get people who are looking at what's going on in the streets. If you're a person like me, and you're a conservative person, and you see a bunch of people and psychedelic drugs and free love and all this stuff going on, and the protests in the streets, and you're thinking, I don't recognize this. This is not my country. Where's the patriotism? Where's the love for our military? Who are those people? Right? And those people are thinking, oh, America is terrible, and they're a bunch of baby killers, and they're looking at people like us and saying, don't you understand what our country's doing? It's terrible, it's evil, it's bad. And that fracture only gets worse over the decades. We've got the veneer of unity. We've got cultural hegemony from the radical left starts to take over our culture. And people who are conservatives are saying, I don't recognize this country anymore. Like, I'm a church-going conservative guy. I don't recognize those people. And so there's this fracture taking place underneath the veneer of unity. And to be fair, what you have on the left is you have people who look at people like me and they say, oh, well, that's a middle-aged white guy who goes to church, so he's a Nazi. So he's a racist. So he's a homophobe. Look, I'm not justifying the criticism or criticizing the criticism on either side. I'm making an observation. And the observation is this. There is a radical schism in this country, but it's not new. It has always existed. And it is going to lead to something, I think, potentially terrible. It's going to tear the country apart. I have a question for you. Do you think that China is an existential threat to America?
Yes.
Yeah, we face an existential threat. Russia is somewhat of an existential threat. The drug cartels on our border are an existential threat. Right? So we face existential threats in the world. So what have we done before when we faced existential threats? We unify. We don't divide, we unify. So there are two choices facing us right now in the United States of America. The first choice is secession, civil war, revolution. I hear people say this all the time, people who I love and respect who say these kinds of things. And I say to them, as somebody who has never experienced war, have you ever experienced war? Like, do you know what that looks like? If you want to know what that looks like, if you hear somebody say, well, we just need a good revolution, or we just need a good civil war, or we just need to tear the country apart and split it in half, are they watching the video from what's going on in Ukraine right now? Because it's heart-wrenching. You see modern cities bombed into rubble. You see babies dead in the street. You see grandmothers weeping over their children dead in the streets. That's potentially what it looks like when you have a war or you have a revolution. So that is one choice, because I promise you the country's coming apart. One way or another, we are decoupling. That is inevitable. It cannot be stopped. That is something that's going to happen in America. So what's the alternative? If it's not revolution, if it's not civil war, if it's not secession, what's the alternative? I didn't plan it this way. I think God had a plan. The alternative is call a convention of states. Right? Why a convention of states? Why is that the alternative? Because it is intended to be the restoration of federalism. Because in the end, we can talk about term limits and balanced budget. We can talk about all of this different stuff. We can talk about limiting the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government. That's just a fancy way of saying we want to take the power away from DC and give it back to the people in the states. Does that sound good to you guys? And I want to be really clear about something. This is entirely nonpartisan. Now, I don't want to mislead you. I'm a conservative guy. I'm an evangelical Christian. I believe that all of our rights come from God. I believe that they're inalienable. I'm proud of that. I'm anti-abortion. I'm everything from a policy perspective that you would expect of a guy from the right. But this project, as a project, is entirely 100% nonpartisan. Why do I say that? I want you to understand why. Because if somebody asks you very simply, what is the Convention of States about? I would say it's about a single question. And the question is, and the most important question facing America today is, who decides? It's not what should we do. It's not how high should our taxes be. It's not should we have gun control. No is the answer, by the way. But it's not about any of that stuff. It's not about the size and scope of our healthcare system. It's not about property tax reform. It's not about ballot integrity and election reform. All of those things are very important. But the most important issue facing America today is who decides. And the way we answer that question is really beautiful calligraphy on a very famous document. It starts with, we the people, right? That's who should decide. And when I say that, and this is important going to the nonpartisan part of this, by we the people, I mean you acting through the people in there. And this will surprise some people, because I understand we're in a blue state right now. This is a blue legislature. Democrats are in control of the legislature. I want them to have the power, not Washington, D.C. I come from California originally. I want the legislature there, which is basically 2/3 Democrat in both houses. I want them to have the power. I might not agree with their policy prescriptions. If I live in the state, I will probably fight to turn the state politically, to turn it away from those kinds of policies, to turn it away from the party that would pursue those. But whoever has been elected by the people in the state legislatures should have the majority of the power in a given state. Am I right about that? And so this is important, because when we go in there and we talk to our Democrat friends, and yes, I do mean friends, this is how we approach. These people come here to do what they believe is the right thing, to serve their communities, to serve the great first state of Delaware. We talk to them with love and respect, and we tell them, well, we may disagree on policy, we want you to have the power. To our Republican friends inside the state legislature, with whom we may agree more on policy, we want them to have the ability to exercise the power in this state legislature. So this is truly, and the only way we're going to do this, a non-partisan venture. And what we're looking for, and I think this is really important, we are looking for in this legislature courageous people in both parties. Courageous Republicans and courageous Democrats who say, we've had enough of Washington, D.C., and we want the people of Delaware to be in charge of Delaware. I'm going to close with this. There's a famous phrase from American history that you all know. And the phrase is that the founders pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. You know, I could say that in pretty much any audience, anywhere I go around the country, and everybody knows those words. And so sometimes I think when we know something by rote like that, it loses its importance. It loses its significance. They become words devoid of actual meaning and context. Those words were said about the men who signed the Declaration of Independence. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And there is a context to this that is critically important that you have to understand, that we have to understand. See, because when they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and sacred honor, much like the oath that we talked about earlier, that Michelle read for us earlier, much like that oath, they did not pledge to the flag. Seems like they could have. They didn't pledge to the Continental Army. Seems like they could have done that. They didn't pledge to George Washington as the indispensable man. They didn't pledge to the Continental Congress. They pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to each other. They did that because they actually understood what they were facing. Because these were people who were facing down the reality of going to war against the largest fighting force, the most sophisticated fighting force ever known to man. They were going against an empire. And they knew what was at stake. And what was at stake was their God-given right to be free men and women, free families, sovereign people. That was what was at stake. And they knew that each of them would face tests, that they would be attacked physically, materially, financially, reputationally. They knew that they faced the gallows, and they knew that if they separated, if they split off from each other, they would definitely lose. Franklin famously said, "We must hang together, or surely we shall all hang separately." And so they understood, and so they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to each other. And I take that very seriously. And every day when I get up in the morning, and I mean this every day, this is not, I don't just say this for a speech. When I get up in the morning, I think, I pledge my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor to you. Because I get to travel all over the country. You know, I'm here today. Tomorrow I'll be in North Carolina. I have trouble remembering where I'm going. Next day is Pennsylvania. Last week it was New Jersey and Maryland. It's the Eastern Seaboard trip. I'll be all over the country, and everywhere I go I think of people like you. And I look in your eyes, and I know that you're in the fight. And I want you to know that when I wake up and when I go to sleep at night, that's what I'm thinking about, that I'm pledging my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor to you. And when I say those aren't just words, I mean it, genuinely, sincerely. If you get in trouble, if you get attacked, if you're assaulted by our opponents, which you will be, generally speaking, your reputation is smeared, I'll do everything I can to step in and to protect and to stand by your side and to fight with you. And I hope that when you leave here today, and you go into that building and you lobby those folks and you're driving home today, that you think that you're willing to do whatever it takes and to pledge your life, your fortune, and your sacred honor. God bless you guys. Thank you for being here today. Show up for your first rally in a small blue state is extraordinary. Wow. Right, really, I'm not blowing smoke. I'm not telling you that because I want you to feel good. And I'll be honest with you, I would have been happy if you had 25 people there. I would have been impressed and it would have been good. The right people always show up. I never worry about how many people. I want as many as we can get, but God puts the right people in front of us when the time is right. So I think you guys did an extraordinary job. I thought it was like perfectly well organized. You guys did everything that you should do at a rally. You inspired people, you informed people, and you engaged people. I know a bunch of people said that they wanted to be involved. You got a bunch of new people out of that. And I think that's incredible. And when you do it in a small blue state, you set a standard for other states. And I travel all over the country. I'll be in North Carolina tomorrow. I'll be in Pennsylvania and Scranton the following day. Last week we were in Maryland and New Jersey. So I did this whole kind of mostly blue state, East Coast tour, Eastern Seaboard tour. But then I'm going to go out, I'll be in a bunch of red states. And one of the things that you allow me to do, and this is so important for you guys to have this as part of your picture of who you are in the overall picture, I am able to use what you do here to drive other states harder, right? Because when people tell me, and they're in wherever it is, Oklahoma, and they're like, it's so hard and we can't get people to come out. I'm like, I was in Maryland, they had 125. I was in New Jersey, they had 125. I was in Delaware, they had 125 people on a weekday at the Capitol. And so I use you guys to taunt the red states. So I appreciate that. I also want to say, sometimes I think there is a perception, which is a very incorrect perception, that, well, the blue states don't really matter because, you know, can you really get it done? And it's so hard in the legislature. It's really hard in your legislature. I get it. You know, I hear it from you guys, but I talk to the legislators also. The God's honest truth, it's not about passing the resolution. We want to pass the resolution. And we're always going to work towards that as our goal, but it's a motivating goal because what you're doing is way more important than passing a resolution. It's more important than getting to a convention. It's more important than actually passing and ratifying amendments. What you're doing is you're building the largest self-governing grassroots army in American history. When we started this organization, that was the meta goal, was, look, we need to be a self-governing country. That means we need to take school boards and city councils and county boards and townships all across the country. If we don't do that, then we're not self-governing people. You know, it's really interesting. I try to understand the historical causes behind the things that happen. We learn the history, but I want to know why the history happened. And one of the things that I think is really fascinating about Convention of States is a question about why would the founders give this power to the state legislature? I mean, it is the most extraordinary power in our system of government. When your state legislators come in and they get sworn into office, after they're sworn in, they have an orientation. And there are people who literally take them around the building we're in today. Here's the chamber, here's your office, here are where the restrooms are, here's your legislative counsel's office, here are your responsibilities. They usually have training classes for them. There is something that they miss in 100% of states, in every legislative house, all 99 bodies in the country. They never tell them, you are the most powerful person in the federal government. And I ask them this question all the time. Do you know what makes you the most powerful person in the federal government? And legislators stare at me like I'm speaking Greek or something, because they don't consider themselves as being involved in the federal government in any way. And the real answer is they are the only people in our Constitution that have the power to call a convention, then to participate in that convention and propose amendments, and then ratify those amendments. I want you to think about what that means. They have the power to change the structure of the federal government, state legislators. So why? Why is that? Why would the framers of the Constitution give them that power? Not the president, not Congress, not the courts, although the courts take that power, right? Mm-hmm. But none of them were supposed to have that power according to our system of governance. So why state legislators? And the answer is almost everybody who was in convention was a state legislator, or a town councilman, or on the county board, or something like that. Almost all of them. And so what they understood is not that people who are in those bodies are better human beings. They understood men are not angels, we're fallen, sinful creatures. But what they really understood is that government close to the people is the best kind of government. That's the most accountable government. Somebody said to me, you know, it's really amazing because I can come here and I can go meet with my state legislator. I can meet with my state senator. I can't meet with my congressman. I can't meet with my U.S. senator, right? So what the founders believed in, they understood human nature. If you and I can sit down eye to eye, we're going to communicate. If you're my representative or you're my senator and I come to your office and say, hey, I need your help with this, or I want to support you in that, or I'm willing to knock doors for you, now we have a relationship, right? And all politics is a big web of relationships. And so they created a system whereby they said, we want to make sure that the people who are going to be the ultimate line of defense for liberty in the United States of America are close to the people. There's that famous Mason quote that where Mason stands up and he addresses the folks assembled there in convention. He's not happy with the Constitution. By the way, Mason never signs the Constitution. Right? And so if you go to Williams College in upstate New York, you can actually see under glass, standing up in the library, Mason's own copy of the Constitution that he used at convention. His notes are all over. You can see on the back all of his objections. But in that moment, 2 days before the end of the convention, September 15th, 1787, he stands and he says, we have a problem with this document. It's fundamental. which is we've given the power to Congress to propose amendments, but not to the people acting through their state legislatures. So it's a fatal flaw in his mind. And he asks a question. He says, are we so naive that we believe a government that has become a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? It's a pretty profound question. You harumph, right? We laugh sometimes when we say that. I'm pretty sure they laughed. We don't have a recording, no video, no audio. It doesn't say laughter in Madison's notes. But what Madison's notes do say is something really profound because it's so short. They say it's a Latin abbreviation. Most people don't know, by the way, Madison knew 5 languages. He wrote shorthand, and all of his notes for convention are in whatever language or shorthand was most succinct for whatever was going on in that moment. His notes are pretty weird to read there because of that, right? So in this point it says nin com, and that's a Latin abbreviation for no comment. In other words, not one person in that room stood up and said, whoa, whoa, hold on a second. Colonel Mason, that's crazy. We don't want to give that power to the people. We don't want to give it to the legislatures. They debated everything. They debated how to debate, right? If you read Madison's notes, they literally debated everything. This is the only thing I'm aware of in the United States Constitution that was suggested where there was no debate, and then we know what happened after that, unanimous vote to include it. It was actually Eldridge Gary is the one who actually wrote the language that was submitted. You guys know the term gerrymandering? It should really be gerrymandering because his name was appropriately pronounced Gary. That was his actual name. So Eldridge Gary introduces the language that we now know as the second clause of Article 5. So this is really important. It's you in relationship with your state legislators that is the most important thing in Convention of States. Particularly hard here. I understand that. It's hard for 2 reasons. One is philosophically, ideologically, most of us are pretty far away from where the Democrats are in your legislature. I understand that. I think it's really important, especially in a state like this, that we recognize that they're human beings. We tend to vilify each other. There's a lot of hate flying around in the world right now. Way too much hate, too much heat. Most of them, who we don't like, who we disagree with, I would say even at times we think they're doing evil things, they don't come to the legislature to do bad, evil things. They come to the legislature, they believe in their hearts that they're doing what's right. It doesn't make it right, it doesn't make it any less bad or any less evil, and I will call it out for that. But when we sit face to face with them, we are sitting with God's creation. We are sitting with another human being made in the image of God. And if we remember that, we will connect with them on a human level. I would encourage you, when you go meet with legislators, I have relationships with legislators on both sides of the aisle, some of whom I disagree with very vehemently. I would encourage you to find out about them. Like, don't just go into somebody's office and say, I want you to support convention states and you're wrong because you're against this, so let me explain all the reasons you're wrong. Walk into an office, notice the triangular folded American flag on their shelf and ask them who they lost, right? That's a flag that was probably over somebody's coffin. Ask them about their service. Ask them about what matters to them. Ask them if there are things that you can do to help them with the things that are important to them. It's so easy and we don't do it. When you walk into somebody's office, be it a legislator or somebody, your doctor or somebody you're meeting the first time, you'll notice baseball trophies on the shelf. You'll notice pictures of their kids. You'll notice pictures of their dogs or pictures of them hunting or whatever it is. Those are things that I call point of relation, right? And you should grab those things and use those things to build a human relationship. Whenever I go into a legislator's office, people who are with me who are grassroots are usually surprised because given my choice, I'll spend 80% of my time talking non-COS stuff. And it usually is we're 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes into a meeting, I have to say, we could probably chat all day. It's awesome, we have so much in common. I just want to take 5 or 10 minutes of your time to talk about convention states. And at that point, by that point, I have a relationship with that person. And when you're in a blue legislature, that's going to be even more important. Because in a red legislature, it might just be, yeah, we hate all those guys on the other side, an awesome thing to do. Go get them, right? I'm all in. And so that's easier. It's harder when you got to dig in and know the person. But this is the system that, as it was designed, because the founders were brilliant, you guys have a special role to play in a blue state because it's harder. I mean, I acknowledge that it's harder. One more thing I want to acknowledge because I make your job harder sometimes. And I know I'm doing it and I apologize for it. And what I mean by that is I'm a right-wing guy. It's where I come from. I'm a conservative Christian. I wear that on my sleeve. I'm stridently pro-life. right? I'm stridently pro-business. I'm stridently pro-Second Amendment. And so that makes it harder for y'all in a blue state. If people watch me on the battle cry and they're from the left, they're going to be like, that guy's a right-wing maniac, right? Because that's just what I am.
We don't send them to your battle cry.
I appreciate that.
We love your battle cry, but we don't send them.
I like it. It's super important, as much as we got to do politics, that we still are who we are, right? And so for Convention of States, we can't hide where we come from. That's who I am. Mike Ferris, who helped me found it. He's a conservative, right-wing guy. Levin, Beck, Hannity, Shapiro, all of these people. If it were me, and I was a Democrat, and you sent me to our site, I would look at it and be like, are you kidding me? Look at all these right-wing maniacs. And we do that of necessity. It's not because we said, oh, let's make this a right-wing cause, right? It's not because I wouldn't be happy to have Democrats on board. I absolutely would be. I had an hour-and-a-half conversation with Tulsi Gabbard about 4 or 5 months ago, and was literally trying to bring Tulsi on board. I was going to hire her as an advisor. She just had too much other stuff going on. I think we'll get an endorsement from her pretty soon, but I was trying to bring her on. I wanted to have a prominent Democrat on board. There are other Democrats that I know that I talk to behind the scenes who I can't say, who actually support what we're doing behind the scenes. They won't say it out front because their tribe would divorce them and kick them out. You see what happens to those folks. The reason I want you to know those things is because I know, right? And I know it makes your job harder, and I apologize for that. It's just where we're at right now. I think it will change. What I really believe is if you think of what we're doing in terms of a very long-term presidential election, right? So in a presidential election, you have your primary, right? Or in any election, but let's use a presidential. And during the primary, all the candidates are appealing to the base. Right? That's what they're doing. It's red meat, right? It might be blue tofu if you're on the left, but it's red. I don't know what they eat. On the right, it's red meat, right? And so that's what they're doing. And sometimes we get really frustrated when we see politicians. We're like, well, where'd all the red meat go? Because now you won the nomination and now you don't sound like that right-wing person anymore. And the reality is they're doing politics, which means they got to appeal to a broader cross-section once they're past the primaries. I think this is important, that this is why we got to get to know the candidates. It doesn't mean they're not really conservative. It means they're doing what they have to do to be elected, right? Sometimes that's, if they're disingenuous about it, I don't like that. But if they're just softening their tone, like you said, you don't show people my battle cry. If they're softening their tone, but they're not changing their values, I'm fine with that. And so if you think of Convention of States in the same way, only over a period of now 9 years or 10 or 12 years, whatever it's going to take us to get to convention, we're still in the primaries. And the reason I say we're still in the primaries, we're just past halfway there, right? 19 states. And if you consider, I'm just going to rough a number for you. Let's call the Trump base 75 million. It might have been 85 million, but let's just call the ones they actually counted. 75 million. And we have 5.2 million supporters. We have not secured our base. Right, so right now what we're doing is we start by, you always work your base first. Some people would call that the low-hanging fruit, the easier people to get, right? Those are people who are part of our audience anyway. Those are people who are going to look at somebody like me and not naturally go, oh, Mark's a crazy right-wing guy, right? And so we start there, but I believe as we get to 25, 27, 28 states, you're going to start to see some Democrats move our way, and we're going to start to bring some of them in, and that'll make it easier for us to appeal to the middle. So I ask your indulgence, your patience. I just don't want you to ever think that I'm ignoring that, because I hear it all the time. And Monica's been telling me for a long time, we talk about this all the time. We're not ignoring it. We know, and we know it makes it harder on you guys, and we appreciate you guys for carrying the extra burden of that and for being tolerant of us. But that's why I always want you to know. And it's really important to me also that you guys just always feel comfortable asking and questioning. Like, it's kind of weird to me. Sometimes you're like, oh, well, Mark, you run this big organization. I don't want to call you. You're important. I don't want to bother you, whatever. We need to know. My greatest fear in all of this is as we grow out of touch. I worry about that a lot. The national team now has, I think we're pretty close to 80 employees now. It's crazy to me. It's like I would have never even imagined something like that. It's impossible. It's gotten impossible for me to have a personal relationship with all of our employees, even, which is horrifying to me, because this is what I love, right? So I just need your help Because if you engage with us, if you engage with your state leadership, honestly, if you engage with Monica when you got concerns, National is here to help you, support you, love you. We describe ourselves as the bottom of our organizational pyramid. We're not the top. The lowest person in our organization, the very bottom of the organization is me. I know that's weird. I'm the CEO, the president. I think the official title is now Grand Poobah, isn't that right? For those of you who are Flintstones fans, that's my adopted title. I'm gonna have it put on my card soon. But the reason for that is because my job is to support everybody else. It's not to be the big cheese, it's to provide the support, to raise the money, to give you guys the resources. You know, Monica, as part of the national team staff, her job is to support you guys, to provide the resources, to give you what you need, and so on. And the very top of the COS organization are the brand new grassroots activists. Those are the most important people in our organization. Those are the gems fresh out of the mine. And so that's our view of how this organization runs. By the way, that was the founder's view of politics. The most important people were those people out there in the community that were working in their community, that were willing to give of themselves for their cities, their counties, their states, and their country. So thank you guys for welcoming me today. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get here. Does anybody have questions? You know, I know you want to go take some pictures, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yeah.
I've asked this question and nobody's been able to answer it.
Uh-oh, there we go. That's a challenge. The gauntlet is thrown.
What is the difference between the 2 million petition signers and the 5 million supporters?
Yeah, the 5 million is a weird number. Okay, so I always like to be super transparent about numbers, and that's good background music. I like it. So the way we come up with the it's 5.2 million now. It's kind of a weird, smoky number. And here's what I mean by that. You take everybody who follows us on Facebook, we take everybody who follows us on all our social media platforms, you take our email list, and you take everybody who is a Citizen Builder subscriber. So all these people who have accounts, you take all those numbers together, and it's almost 5.2 million. The way that number really works is I take Facebook, and I take 30% off the top and throw it away. And the reason I do that is you can't tell who is on Facebook that's also in your other databases, because Facebook doesn't give you all their data. Right? So I can't scrub the data against it. Honestly, it's kind of a random number, that 30%. I just at one point said, look, let's just take a big chunk, almost a third of it off, and just throw it away. That's where that number comes from. Let me give you what I think are the more real numbers. I use that number because you gotta have a number that you can throw out and say, here's the big number, right? The media likes it, donors like it, so we use that number. I wanna know things like, how many people get our emails? Okay, so a lot of groups will tell you, oh, we have an email list and it's 2 million people or 2.5 million people. Maybe. The question is who's reading them, right? If you have 2 million people on your email list and nobody's reading them, then you don't have an email list, right? And you're just spending money sending emails. So our email list right now is probably, I'm estimating because it's growing, but it's right around 900,000, roughly. So that's great, that's a huge number. It's not true though. It's about 450 to 500,000 that are regular openers. And we determine regular openers by they open at least 25% of our emails, and they've opened an email in the last 90 days. They haven't opened it in 90 days, we start to pull them from the list. We'll email them later on and try and get them back on and see if they're interested. We don't just throw them away. But that's what I'm looking for. So for me, if I told you who's really in our email list, it's about 450,000 is the number, which is, by the way, huge. Sounds a lot smaller than 5 million, but compared to everybody else out there in the conservative world of people who are actually opening. Now, by the way, most organizations won't tell you what I just told you. Right? Because they're going to tell, oh, it's 1 million, it's 2 million, it's 5 million. Like, I'll throw out the 5 million number, but if anybody wants to know, I'll tell them what the real deal is. Here's another interesting number that we got recently. And a lot of you are in this number. In order to be a COS volunteer, like you signed up, you signed the petition, you opened a Citizen Builder account, and then you said, I'm going to volunteer for something, right? I'm going to be district captain or a regional captain or a legislative liaison, whatever your chosen position is. And all of you who have those positions know it takes a lot of time. Like, you guys put work into those positions. You got trained, you spent the time to get trained, probably went through Convention of States University. If you haven't, you need to. You did the classes, right? So I know that you're actually real people really engaged in the fight. And the way I look at that, and this was actually taught to me by a big donor and a friend of mine who's on our board, Tim Dunn. He asked me about all of you, and he was asking me, well, how many of this position do you have? How many of that position? How much do you think the average person works? And I was telling him all that, and he said, so those are employees. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they're necessary to the operation of your organization. They are trained and essentially certified. They've agreed to take on certain duties. And if they don't do those duties, you relieve them of that job, right? And put somebody else in that job. And I said, yeah. And he said, so the only difference between them and an employee is you don't pay them, right? But they really are employees. And he said, how many of those do you have? And I said, at the time, it's now more, but I said 8,800 was the rough. Now it's over 9,000 is the number. And I said, about 9,000. He said, so you're a mega corporation. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you have over 9,000 employees. Right, so think about that. That's what this organization is. And when you think about it that way, the thing that I can tell you absolutely, unequivocally, without any doubt, is there is no other conservative organization in the United States of America that's even close. Not even in the realm, not 1,000. The fact that we have 9,000 of you that have been willing to actually take a job that you don't get paid for is extraordinary. It's so extraordinary that my friend Tim I was telling you about, he supports a lot of organizations. He has me coming to DC in July to tell all these other organizations he supports about you. That's the main thing he wants me to talk about. How did we build up? How do we have dedicated activists like you? How did you have 9,000 unpaid employees all over the country? Because every other organization in the United States of America would kill to have them. So I realize that's a long answer for a short question, but I like transparency. Like, I want you guys to know what's really going on. You guys should be so proud of that, and that makes you very elite. Every other organization in America wishes they could say what I just told you.
So you run a mega church.
You know, I actually, there's a good analogy there, and look, you guys know I don't hide my faith. I'm a very out Christian. If you know my background, I'm a Jewish Christian, a Messianic Jew, some people call it. Both my sides of my family, Jewish from Ukraine of all places. When the organization started, I had just become a Christian, and so I became a Christian when I was 51 years old. And when we started, we said we would do politics in a Christian way, not a Christian-facing organization. That's not our job. Is not to press Christianity out in the world. We're doing politics, right? But if you're a person of faith, you know you carry your faith with you into everything you do. And so what ultimately happened is we try to be obedient to the Lord, and more and more and more the Lord has woven himself through the organization. And again, not because we said, hey, we need to do more Christian stuff. It was because it was asked of us by regular people. So I don't know how many of you have taken a servant leadership course? Anybody in here taking it? So there's a few in here. I highly recommend you do if you haven't yet. And we teach all of our employees and a lot of volunteers now servant leadership. There's actually a book about it by Dave Cooter that we use. It was Tim Dunn, who's the guy I was just telling you about, the donor and friend of mine, helped write this book. It's business principles, it's organizational principles, but it's all scripturally based, right? So this is what we train people. So when we started, we thought, well, we'll train up a few people in servant leadership. And then it was more people wanted it, and more people wanted it, and more people wanted it. And so we responded. I don't know, do you know how many classes we're teaching right now, Monica?
I've lost track. There's so many simultaneously.
Right. I mean, we got to have, you know, we got 8 to 10 per class. We got to have 15, 20 classes going on right now. I mean, we'll train hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in the principles of servant leadership this year. And out of servant leadership, what started happening is, and by the way, if you're not a believer, it's all good. I was not a believer for my whole life. And I have plenty of good people out there aren't believers, and you can take servant leadership and not be a believer. Scripture's good teaching for anybody, even for non-believers, right? The principles are still true whether you're a believer or not. So what started to happen out of that, though, is we started having people who would say, you know, I'm reading all this stuff in servant leadership. I don't know how to study the Bible. Do you guys do Bible studies? We're like, no, I'm not a church. I'm like, well, could you? I guess. And so Jeannie Rapini, who was head of our grassroots programs for years, great servant leader. She's led women's Bible study for decades. she did a Bible study class. And then it was 2 Bible study classes. And it was 3 Bible study classes. And pretty soon she couldn't do enough. She's also teaching servant leadership. So we actually hired a pastor out of a church in Michigan who I knew through a friend, and he was looking for something. He was burnt out on the politics of being a pastor, believe it or not, right? And so we hired him to run our mentoring department. And so then we hired a woman that he knew who's now teaching more women's Bible studies. And now I think we have 3, probably 5 men's Bible studies going now. And then out of that grew a thing we call the Shawl series. It's by an organization called Mentoring Sacred Arts. These are individual trainings for people who want to kind of do a deep dive and build their relationship with Jesus. I think we have 18 people going through the Shawl series. It's a 1-year commitment right now. And so it's become, much to my surprise and much to my great joy, the ministry as well. Everything is ministry if you're a believer, right? And so you do ministry where you find yourself, and so that's what's happened. So the organization underneath, what you'll find is if you peel back the skin, it's a very faith-oriented organization. That being said, super important, I say one more time, there are people who are not people of faith who are in the organization. There are Jewish people in our organization. And so it's fine, we welcome everybody. How could I not? 51 years of my life, I was not a believer. And so we make everybody feel welcome, but we're also obedient servants in the Lord. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I love the concept you put out that we never really liked each other in this country. That makes you feel a lot better.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Yeah, that was very refreshing. And the question, and I'm not really trying to fish for an answer here, but do you think it's about the same throughout our whole history? Is it any worse now, or any better now, or what do you think?
I don't think it's any worse right now.
Yeah.
And you know, there's two reasons I would say that. I mean, one, in the 1860s, we actually killed or maimed 700,000 of us, and tore families apart in a violent conflict. And if you think about what came out of that, thank God the end of slavery and all of that, but what came out of that is we forced half the country into a union. Talk about not liking each other. They wanted a divorce, right? And we said, no way. And we forced people at gunpoint to be part of the United States of America. So I don't think we're certainly not worse than that. I think, you know, we may be headed that way, but I don't think we're there yet. We're not at that point. Second is, I think what we think about this stuff is magnified because of social media, right? So somebody recently got in trouble on Twitter for saying something inflammatory and controversial, and I thought, wow, isn't that what Twitter is? Right? So really, Twitter is a place where you say something expecting other people are going to attack you for saying it, and then you attack back. It's an inflammation machine, right? It's like one giant national infection, right? And I think, generally speaking, that's what social media has become. And so I think that exacerbates everything. I think it puts all these differences under the magnifying glass. And then I would add one more thing. The inflaming factor, the biggest inflaming factor now is Washington, D.C. itself. Because why do we care what happens in Washington, D.C.? Because they have so much power, right? It used to be, literally, if you went back to the 1800s, somebody nominated a Supreme Court justice, you wouldn't even know. I mean, it's not only would you not care, you actually would not even know. And because generally speaking, the Supreme Court didn't affect your life. What went on in Congress, 99 9/10% of it, you wouldn't know. We didn't have the technology to know, but also you wouldn't care. Because it was like, oh, they altered a treaty with France. Whatever, like, does that really affect me day to day? No, you didn't care. Or even when the presidents were elected, like, we would have a national election and then we'd all just go back to business of our own lives. Now, because there's so much power in DC, you have to care. Like, it actually, who is on the Supreme Court? Every Supreme Court fight matters. It's life and death. This is part of what we're trying to fix. This is the problem, right? If we can remove the power from DC, it will remove some of the inflammation. The inflammation is created by this intense power congregation in Washington, D.C. So I don't think it's worse than it's been before. I think there are factors which make it look worse. And lastly, I'm more hopeful right now than I've been at any time in my 12 years in politics. Which seems crazy because things are way worse. Like, this is the worst it's been since I've been in politics. But I think what we're seeing right now in the United States is the divide is clear. When I first came into politics, there was a divide, but it wasn't this clear. And what I see, and again, I wouldn't say this in front of a blue state legislature, but we're seeing a very clear divide in America between good and evil. And we live in a time when some people call good evil and evil good, right? And so I actually think that's really good for the country, because I think there are a lot of good-hearted people out there who are not necessarily politically aligned with us, but when they see what the radical left is doing, they're definitely not politically aligned with that, right? The average American, we do this polling all the time. So on the abortion issue, I know abortion's being considered over there in the State House right now. It's really bad what they're going to do. It would be 82% of Americans are opposed to what your legislature is about to do. 82% of Americans. I mean, the numbers are incredible. The majority of left-wing Democrats, people who consider themselves progressives, are opposed to what they're about to do in your legislature. Now, if you're pro-life, you might not like this. I don't like this. The majority of Americans are pro-choice in the first trimester. And that's just where the nation's at. We got to work on that. We'll get better, but that's where we're at right now. It's about divided when you get into second trimester. Third trimester, 18% of Americans are in support of abortion. So what are they doing over there? Or what are they doing in Washington, D.C.? What are they doing in all these states where they're passing these radical abortion laws? It's not for their own populations, because their people hate it. So here's why I say it's good, because they're showing what they are, right? And I guarantee you there are a lot of Democrats, and I talk to them. I say, look, I know you're pro-choice, I know I'm pro-life. Do you believe you should be able to kill a baby right before it comes out? And they go, no, that's disgusting. Well, that's what your legislators are doing right now. And I will tell you, if you talk to almost any of your friends who are Democrats, and you ask them if they're in favor of that, they will literally recoil in horror. It's not just that they'll say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. They'll be like, that's disgusting. Of course I don't. And they'll be outraged at you. Of course I don't even believe that. That's ridiculous and horrible. Nobody believes that, is what they would say. Except for they're going to do that in the legislature probably this week, right? And so I think that's good, because what we're showing is that really what we believe is kind of mainstream America. There was a study done about 10 years ago by the Annenberg School of Journalism at UCLA out in Los Angeles. And they found if we didn't have media bias in the United States, left-wing media bias, that the United States average politics in the United States would be pretty much like Texas is right now. Which is really interesting. Texas, where I'm from, everybody thinks it's a very red state. It's really not. I mean, we struggle. Your sister knows. We struggle, right? It's a red state, but it's not deep red, right? And that's what the United States would look like if we didn't have biased media. Most people in this country, in their hearts, in their common sense, they're kind of center-right. But then they get pushed by the media to be left or way left.
Are they really pushed, or is it just a distortion that we're making to believe that that's? I think it's a lot of that too.
When you say distortion, what do you mean?
The media misrepresents what the country is really about all the time. Like I think we are right of center.
Yeah, well, I think,
but they'll have you believe we're left of
center. I think that's true. Yeah. But I also think there are a lot of people in this country that believe left-wing things because they don't hear anything else.
Well,
right. So if all you watch is CNN or MSNBC or ABC,
that's a brainwashing.
Then that's like, well, that's the thing. That's what you know, right? And so, you know, my son just graduated from Scalia Law School, George Mason in DC, and he has a bunch of friends that are from the left, because that school, though it's Scalia Law, it's about 60% of the student body is from the left. Because at public school, there's good tuition rates for in-state students, so you get a bunch of students that are left. So he's got all these friends that they're more left than he is. You might guess he's kind of a right-winger. And so he has conversations with them about this kind of stuff, and they literally have never heard, these are law students, the kind of stuff that we talk about.
And they control the education system.
They control the education system, they control the media. So these kids grew up in liberal public schools, in liberal families, they watch liberal media. And so to me, this also helps me have a heart for people on the left. Look, if you know and you know all the whole thing and you still believe that, well, shame on you. But if you've been raised that way and that's all you've ever heard and all you've ever known, You know, like people in the Soviet Union, a lot of them thought, oh, well, this is a better system than capitalism, because people under capitalism, they starve, right? It's not true, but that's what they were taught. And so I think, I agree with you. I think there is a misrepresentation that takes place. I do think the country, by and large, is more conservative than the media represents. I know this from my polling, because we poll every week. I'll give you some amazing stats from polling. We poll every week for 3 reasons. Find out what the American people really think. I think I know a lot of it because I travel and I hang out with you guys so much and I listen a lot. So I learn a lot. You know, I learn from your comments on Facebook and all this stuff. So when you guys, by the way, if you write or you're commenting, I read that stuff. Like, I learn. What I say on TV comes from you guys, so do it, for sure. Don't think nobody's listening, because we are. So one, I get it from there, so I want to know what the American people think. I want to test what I think they think. So we poll for that. Number 2, we poll because we want to drive narrative. Right, so this is really important. We as conservatives have a natural tendency to be responsive to media narrative. And so the media says, we need gun control. And what do we say? No, we don't. That's our response. No, we don't need gun control. That's ridiculous. Gun control doesn't do it. That's not a way you win a fight. You don't win a fight by saying, hey, you tell me what the rules are and I'll fight by whatever rules you want. That's a great way to lose a fight, right? You bring your fist.
It's reactionary.
Yeah, it's reactionary. So part of the reason we poll is we will posit questions in a way that helps us to get a response that then we can put out in the media. And we get thousands upon thousands of media references on our poll. So I'll give you an example. Last week we ran a poll and we asked the American people, do you think that kids in school, or that schools are more dangerous because we don't allow teachers and administrators to carry guns? Do you think schools are more dangerous because we don't allow teachers and administrators to carry guns? Almost 60% of the American public says schools are more dangerous because we don't allow the teachers and administrators to carry guns. That's not part of the narrative right now, right? I want that. We want that to be part of the narrative. That's why we did this poll. It was the most popular poll and uptake in the media of any poll we've ever done. Literally tens of thousands of media references to that poll. I was on so many television shows and so many radio shows talking about the poll. So what we do there is we drive narrative. Now we make people talk about having armed people in the schools. So it's really important that you take that into your own life. When somebody says to you, we need more gun control, I can't believe this 18-year-old kid was able to buy an AR, then I say, I'm not even going to talk about gun control. I know it doesn't. I can say that doesn't work, that's stupid, we don't need more gun control. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say, look, do you want to save children's lives? Yes. Okay, of course you do. I know you do. So here's the deal. If we arm teachers and administrators and allow the ones that want to get armed and trained, we will absolutely save lives. Because shooters don't like to go places where there are people with guns, right? And so can we agree on that? Can we put a fence around every school? We spent $40 billion on Ukraine in the last couple of weeks. Can we spend a few billion to put fences around schools? Can we have single point of access at schools? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip the narrative. So that's the other reason we poll. And then the last reason we poll is everybody needs to know about Convention of States, right? Yes. So building brand, you ever think about like McDonald's advertising, and they spend billions of dollars. And when they advertise to you, when you see a McDonald's commercial, you don't get up out of your house and get in your car and drive to McDonald's and buy a burger. That's not how it works, right? It's called brand advertising. What they're doing is McDonald's is in your head. And so now, when you're at work and you're hungry for lunch and you know there's a McDonald's down in the corner, you go there because you remember McDonald's, right? That's called brand advertising. Super expensive. No nonprofit in the world can do brand advertising. You don't ever see it. You don't see nonprofits on television running billions of dollars worth of ads. So how do you get people to say and think Convention of States, Convention of States, Convention of States? Millions of times. You poll. Because every single time they talk about one of our polls, and by the way, it's now millions of times a year documented, they say Trafalgar Group Convention of States poll. And so they don't even know what Convention of States is, but now you talk to one of your friends about Convention of States, they're like, oh, I think I've heard of those guys. Aren't those 6 guys that did that interesting poll on guns? Or what? And so there are 3 reasons we do our polling. Those are the 3 reasons we're polling. All right, any other questions here before we close out? I know I'm going on and on. I'm a lawyer, you gotta forgive me, I get paid by the word.
In Delaware, we can't do it, but in other states we can do
Specifically, that's not constitutional in regard to Article 5. And the reason is Article 5 is a federal constitutional procedure, and it says the legislatures must call for a convention of states.
But how can you petition through a referendum for the people to vote for their legislators to do that?
You could create what we would call a recommendatory petition or initiative or something like that. Here's the problem with that. You're talking millions of dollars to pull one of those off, and it'll be a multi-million-dollar war against it. And I don't do things like that because they're too high profile, and if I lose that, then we're dead in the state. It's the same reason in some red states, this is a micro example of that. In some states, people say, well, we need to work to get convention of states on the Republican Party platform, right? And I say, are you 100% sure you can win? And they'll say, well, I think we have the support, and here's my thing. That's, if you're 100% sure, we've done it, and it's a great thing to do if we can win. If you think it's 75% chance you win, don't do it. Because if you lose, Republicans will use it as an excuse forevermore to not pass the Convention of States resolution.
But when I read that 85% of Americans wants term, so
right.
Okay, then we need to make for those 85% to speak up, obviously.
So if we did, here's the problem with the proposition. Remember, it's not going to be just us speaking. It's going to be the opposition. And here's what they're going to say in a blue state. Because I face this now, believe it or not. They're going to say, you, my friend, Ben, want to repeal the 13th and 14th Amendments. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring back slavery. You hate black people. You're a white supremacist. Like, I hear it, and I go in legislatures. I'll close with this story, and then we'll close out. I was in the I think it was Mississippi State Legislature. First meeting in the legislature that day, we sat down with a black Democrat, and he was a pastor, really awesome guy. When we sat down, we had a wonderful conversation. Again, I walked out of that office just thinking, man, if this day is going to be like this is going to be great. And before we finished, he said, can I pray for y'all's success? And so we talked faith, we talked family, we talked Constitution. It was like, he was my brother when we were done. It was just one of the best legislative meetings I've ever had. And we came out of there, and our team was like, man, that was awesome. We've never seen that kind of interaction with the Democrats here. And then I got to the committee hearing. This is probably, 6 years ago. I got to the committee hearing, and so I'm testifying at the committee hearing. And he's one of the people on the committee. And he starts to speak, and I feel like it's a different human being. And he starts accusing me of being a racist and wanting to reimpose slavery. And I'm looking at the guy like, didn't I just pray with you? It's like your evil twin brother? What's happening here? But that's the script, right? So they're going to use that script on us, even when they don't believe it, because, when you got nothing else, that's what they're going to use. They're going to use that card. And so what we don't want to do is get into a public fight. You never want to be in a public fight where your defense is, I'm not a racist. And that's a bad game to play. So far we've stayed out of that. I have some really good friends who are the top experts on proposition and initiative in the country, and they've recommended right now we stay out of that game. All right, what are we supposed to do? You wanted to do a group picture?
I would like to give these gifts, and I know after our conversation about your shirts that it probably won't work for you, but
He's going to make it work.
maybe we'll sort of have a Delaware.
Oh, yeah. No, this is great. This gets worn on the battle cry, right? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
There we go. That's going to put it on right now.
If it's the wrong size, I have other sizes in my car.
And Jenny. And then everybody gather around. Blue shirts in front, sort of. Dan is going to be here.
We're going to take a picture in front of the
Oh, you want to take it here, or
where
you recommend it?
Now let's do it here.
Okay. So that was my first.
You had to do wide angle on your camera, right?